#2 Georgia 2024 preview, plus news and notes from across college football after the stinger. Hello and welcome to episode 52 of Good Morning College Football. I'm Nicholas Ian Allen of CFB Winning Edge and CampusToCanton.com. Thank you so much for joining us today as we will get into our full Georgia preseason preview. If you missed our first edition of sort of our updated focus of this show, we previewed #1 Ohio State. The Buckeyes are the top-rated team in the CFB Winning Edge Team Strength Power Rankings, which are, of course, available to our C2C Winning Edge and all 22 tier members at CampusToCanton.com. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to the Campus to Canton YouTube channel. Get a wide range of access there. In addition to these shows, which of course you can join us live in a variety of places, but we very much appreciate those of you who subscribe to the channel, who like these videos. It really does help us a lot. But also, you might see the C2C Rankings Summit Week has kicked off on Tuesday. Several of the C2C founders met to discuss running back rankings on this channel. Also offered a little bit of news on a new tool that is available for Campus to Canton subscribers, designed to be available to the NIL and all 22 tiers. But Felix announced that the new draft tool is currently, for the next week or so, available to all C2C members. So you can join for as little as $2.99 per month at CampusToCanton.com and get access to that new draft tool. Try it out before committing to one of those higher tiers. But this is a game-changing tool, very impressive. Put your league ID number in if it's a college fantasy football league or the college side of your C2C league, and filter by position, filter by a wide range of information, including whether you're looking for CFF rankings, C2C rankings, Devi rankings, and the tool will show who is the best available player based on the rankings from the experts at CampusToCanton.com. So really a great time-saving tool. Get access to that for a very limited time for all C2C tier members. But this time next week, it'll be available only to NIL and all 22 tier members. And of course, our CFB Winning Edge information, our team profiles, our returning production database, our stat projections, which will be available later this summer, updated for 2024, are available to all 22 and C2C Winning Edge tier members as well. So we've had quite a bump in subscribers on those particular tiers since we last talked about Ohio State with our team preview. So not sure if that's connected or not, but we do use those tools a lot in these previews. And if you want access to all 134 teams, you can get that by signing up as a C2C Winning Edge tier or all 22 tier member. All right. So in the intro, partly because it's, I guess, habit at this point, I do the little intro, what we're talking about, and then say plus news and notes from across college football after the stinger. Well, there's not very much as far as news to discuss here. A few, little changes made, a couple of transfer commitments late in the cycle, a little bit of depth. But for the most part, not very much to discuss. I have seen sort of some other ranking systems rolling out. I know ESPN's Football Power Index was updated earlier this week. Georgia is #1, to be expected there. I was a little surprised to see how far down the list, Ohio State is, I believe they're number 4 in the most rated, most up-to-date FPI numbers. But also saw the Sporting News put out updated rankings, or a couple of different rankings available this week from, The Athletic, I think, has an updated ranking as well. So I may, if get the chance while not doing other things, put together some sort of composite on those. Just curious to see how some of the really smart folks out there see these teams, how they compare to our CFP Winning Edge power rankings. But part of the reason we do what we do, and part of the reason is I wanted to focus on this type of team preview, probably isn't the most exciting, but I think it does give a little bit of a better view of how we evaluate these teams based on the numbers that we use, and the fact that opinion has nothing to do with it. I know opinion doesn't go into FPI or SP Plus or things like that as well, but a lot of the magazines that are coming out now have an opinion-based ranking, or will make their top 25, the Sporting News or Athlon Sports, or whatever else is out there. A lot of those top 25s are predicted order of finish based on win-loss record and things like that. And that is just not how we do it. Our rankings are only based on what the numbers tell us, and they're primarily focused on our roster strength ratings, which are based on individual player ratings built using those initial recruiting ratings come out of high school, adjust for experience and production, do make some updates with some transfer updated ratings in there, or if a player just really overperforms based on what they've done on the field. There are some other sites out there, On3 we use more and more recently, with some updated ratings there, but we adjust for experience and production, add production points to the calculation based on how a player performs on the field, if they've reached certain statistical benchmarks in game or throughout the course of the season. We build those player ratings into unit and position ratings, which we talked about on this show, and into those roster strength rankings. That's the biggest piece of that calculation. But then we also look at team performance, where it doesn't have anything to do with talent, stats only. How well do these teams perform on the field? Throw that in the mix. We also do our coach ratings, which are based on those team performance ratings, but specific to those head coaches. And we see, how the numbers shake out, and that's what we go with. And we use those power ratings to project individual point spreads per game, and also total all those up for win totals. So let's get into all of those numbers for our 2024 Georgia Bulldogs team preview. So going to share my screen here, and let's take a look at our 2024 Georgia team profile. Look back first at what were the results last year. How well did this Georgia team play? Which, of course, Georgia spent most of the season, a large part of it, ranked number 1 in the country, rolled through the regular season undefeated, and for the most part, with the possible exception, if you look at those post-game win expectancy numbers, which we use collegefootballdata.com and their box score, advanced post-game numbers, where Missouri did actually have more than a 50% chance of beating Georgia in that matchup. But other than the SEC championship, which of course Georgia ended up coming up short in that game against Alabama, jumped out to an early lead, but then Alabama basically sort of controlled the rest of the game. From that point on, ended up Alabama, of course, having a 61% post-game win expectancy percentage in that game. The final score a little bit closer than that contest mostly seemed to be. Bama had a 2-possession lead for the most part in the second half. Georgia got a late touchdown and then wasn't able to get a stop for to get the ball back from Jalen Milroe. And then a lot of us saw, or maybe you just weren't even interested in tuning in, perhaps, based on how things went down with Florida State and the injuries and then later the opt-outs. The Seminoles left out of the playoff, ended up going into the Orange Bowl against Georgia, which had, for the most part, it's full team available. Georgia ends up dominating Florida State in that Orange Bowl 63-3, and capping off an 13-1 season, undefeated in the regular season, undefeated in SEC play prior to that conference championship game, but still, a disappointing season for most folks in Athens, you would say. Coming off back-to-back national championships, having such a, for the most part, dominant run through the regular season. If you paid attention to the CFP Winning Edge podcast during last season, I personally just kept expecting, especially, after that off week, middle of the year, where things really started to get tougher schedule-wise with Florida, Missouri, Ole Miss, Tennessee, back-to-back. I thought Georgia was going to slip up at some point. They came close against Missouri, then just absolutely dominated Ole Miss, dominated Tennessee for the most part, and until SEC championship game, they came up just a little bit short. This Georgia team was among the very best in college football. We take a look at our team performance numbers. Georgia finished 5th in overall team performance. Keep in mind that Orange Bowl game and that SEC championship game actually do not go into our team performance ratings. We look at regular season only. We look at against FBS opponents only. We might, with the expanded playoff, have to take a look at maybe incorporating a little bit more of playoff performance into that mix. But as of right now, those team performance numbers that we use are only based on the regular season against FBS opponents. So that 63-3 victory doesn't count, but also the only loss of the season doesn't really factor in either. So number 5 in team performance overall, number 3 on offense, top 5 in both passing offensive team performance and rushing offensive team performance. Just a very efficient offense last season for Georgia. Top 20 defense, a little bit lower than we are used to. Georgia, during its national championship runs, played pretty much. I mean, you look over here at their history, defensive team performance numbers, number 1 in 2022, number 1 in 2021. Those were the national championship years. Last season, took a little bit of a step back. Top 5 still against the pass defensively, but barely top 50 against the run. And one thing I was catching up on some SEC championship game highlights earlier, and kind of those short yardage situations bit Georgia a little bit. Couldn't get a stop on a couple of key Alabama, 3rd or 4th downs. And then offensively, a couple of times where they had an opportunity on 3rd down to move the chains or, save a little time toward the end of the game, punching it in for a score, weren't able to get it done until 4th down. So that's something perhaps, if we're nitpicking a little bit, looking at how is this team going to improve, or where are some areas where, maybe we need to pay a little bit of closer attention to what could stand in the way of this Georgia team getting back to a national championship. That kind of jumped out to me a little bit, again, revisiting those highlights. All right, let's look now at the returning production numbers. Georgia ranks 35th in our CFP Winning Edge adjusted returning production calculations. That is on the high side for a team that recruits as well as Georgia does. And we'll get into, those position by position raw recruiting ratings. But we talked about this with Ohio State, which actually, finishes a little bit higher in these ratings. But Georgia is, one of those teams, along with Alabama. LSU, of course, has a track record of this in the past. Ohio State, certainly until this year, got a lot more players coming back for their senior seasons, higher profile than perhaps we're used to. But Georgia being top 35 in returning production is rare for a team that is this talented, position by position, that loses a lot of those incredibly talented players after their third season on campus. A lot of guys leave early for the NFL draft. Brock Bowers was one, leading receiver last year. On the offensive line, Amarius Mims was one. Two on the defensive side of the ball, Javon Bullard and Kamari Lassiter. But with those four, I mean, that's a pretty low number for Georgia. They were able to get Carson Beck back. A lot of folks expected that he might have been a first-round draft pick in the 2024 NFL draft, but him coming back, preseason Heisman favorite or among the Heisman favorites, now expected, on the very, very short list, if not fully the favorite to be number one overall draft pick in the 2024 draft. So that was key, huge. Carson Beck, who threw for nearly 4,000 yards last season, 9.5 yards per attempt. Also a 24-6 touchdown to interception ratio. Getting him back, getting arguably the best quarterback in college football is a major win for this Georgia team. I mentioned on our Monday show when we were looking at the Ohio State quarterback situation, I was brought in, it definitely caught my eye that the SEC StatCat quarterback study and superlatives there. The author of that, oh geez, my name just his name just escaped me. Clark Brooks, my apologies, Clark. Does incredible work, very in depth. Looked at nearly 40 FBS quarterbacks against their toughest opponents analytically, dug into the film, broke it all down and divided these quarterbacks into different superlative groups. And we talked about how Will Howard, expected to be Ohio State's quarterback, really was rarely mentioned. He was an honorable mention in one category, was mentioned among the top 5 in play action. Carson Beck is all over this study, including top 5 as far as his downfield placement, and then number 1 in Clark's estimation evaluation among play action, number 1 as a high pass floor quarterback, number 1 in high catchability. So really, just one of the best quarterbacks in college football. Bruce Feldman earlier, a couple of weeks ago in May for The Athletic, had interviews with anonymous coaches on 2025 quarterback draft class, those expected to enter the draft class. And there were a lot of really, really positive words for Carson Beck. One veteran SEC defensive coordinator said, quote, "I think he'll be the number 1 overall pick. A few things really stood out to me after playing him. He runs better than you think because he doesn't do it often, and he has such a quick release." Another coach of a defensive coordinator of a top 25 team, according to Feldman, said, quote, "He played lights out against us. He's got that prototypical first-round QB look to him. His touch on the deep ball was tremendous." So great arm strength. In the spring game, it looked like maybe early on, especially, the deep ball wasn't quite working for Carson Beck, but as the game went on, and it was a little bit of a surprise to see how much Carson Beck played in that spring game. But as the game went on, you could see he was settling down a little bit, getting a little bit more in rhythm with his receivers, and towards the end made some throws that just the broadcast team had to pick their jaw up off the floor, based on how he was fitting the ball into some tight windows and showing excellent touch and things like that. So Beck, key player to build around. A little bit of the opposite situation of our Ohio State preview, where quarterback was a real question mark, or something where maybe there's not an obvious perfect answer, I should say. Not really a major question mark. I think they'll be fine. But at Georgia, you're starting from, some might say, the best at the position in college football. And then from there, build around. There's a few questions, but a couple of things worth mentioning. The quarterback room got a little bit deeper, even though they lost Brock Vandagriff to Kentucky via the transfer portal. Vandagriff expected to start in Lexington. Gunnar Stockton back, got a ton of reps this spring. Highly rated true freshman coming in, Ryan Puglisi, was limited by injury this spring, but added Jaden Rashada, former highly rated, expected to sign with Florida. A lot of drama, ends up at Arizona State, transfers after appearing in 3 games, started week 1 for the Sun Devils last year. So adding him and adding depth to that QB room is definitely good for Georgia. The running back position, losing Dajan Edwards and Kendall Milton, it hurts a little bit, but adding Trevor Etienne, one of the higher rated transfers, and getting him from arch rival Florida was key. And then there's plenty of depth behind there as well. Roderick Robinson II got some action last season, Cash Jones as well, but maybe a little bit less depth at the running back position, as we'll get to a little bit later. The receiving core lost some key pieces. Brock Bowers, very special tight end, does some very unique things, even though he played in just 10 games last season. Ended up leading the team in every major receiving category, was targeted 71 times, had 56 catches, 714 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Dominic Lovett was close in pretty much every category he returns, and most, I think, would expect him to be the top target this year. Georgia, of course, lost Led McConkey, who was limited at times due to injury, but he is off to the NFL and was a high round draft pick. Marcus Rosemy, Jack Saint, outproduced McConkey in more opportunities last season. But with him gone, the additions of Colby Young, perhaps the biggest impact newcomer on certainly in that receiving core, had a good spring. Big target, listed at 6'3", 215, but to my eye, looks a little bit bigger than that. London Humphreys, highly rated transfer, got some key playing time as a true freshman at Vanderbilt last season. Seems like he has a high ceiling as well. Ra Thomas, Dylan Bell, those guys got a lot of opportunities, especially with McConkey and Bowers limited at times last season. And then at the tight end position, even though they lost Brock Bowers, he's not on the official roster just yet. I just checked it again this morning, but Benjamin Urisak, who himself missed time last season due to injury, but the transfer from Stanford, widely considered one of the best tight ends in the country. We've seen flashes of that, and he should step in, if not to start over Oscar Delp. Those two likely to combine to really help replace a lot of the production that Brock Bowers had. The offensive line is in good shape, even though they lose Cedric Van Pran, who was one of the key leaders on the team last season, and certainly at the center position, key position. He has gone. Amarius Mims, another player who was limited last season to just 7 games, but him moving on to the NFL. 4 double-digit starters are back, but one, Monroe Freeling, who actually didn't start last season, we have expected to be the starting right tackle this year, and also Jared Wilson, pretty highly regarded center, stepping up into Van Pran's shoes at the center position. Tyke Smith, leading tackler, moved on after running out of eligibility. We mentioned the loss of Bullard and Lassiter. Linebacker Jamon Dumas-Johnson transferred out to Kentucky, but there's a lot of depth at that linebacker position where it seems like there's going to be a very, very smooth transition there. Also, Zayvon Sori, Marvin Jones Jr., who was likely to start now at Florida State. A lot of positive reports coming out of spring practice about his pass rushing ability. Nevertheless, a lot of talent and experience returning on the defensive side of the ball. The number might not look very impressive, 73rd in our adjusted defensive returning production on the defensive side of the ball. But for a Georgia team that lost, some very talented guys at each level of the defense, and thinking of the players who return, including if it's not Carson Beck atop draft boards right now, Mikael Williams, who's listed as a defensive lineman, playing more of an outside linebacker role so far this year. Going to move him around a little bit. I believe he's been, top of a lot of way too early NFL draft prospect lists that I've seen in the early months. So Georgia certainly in good shape when you look at the returning production numbers. Getting back to the depth chart, our projections, our roster strength, and position strength ratings. This is where our way of evaluating things, here's where the separation comes as far as Georgia compared to Ohio State, and that's really the only question here. And for me, when we compare our numbers to a lot of other folks out there, we're not the only ones who have Ohio State number one. Excuse me, that's my show sheet. Who have Ohio State number one, and who have Georgia number two. But I'm curious as to how it worked out that way, and how our numbers compare maybe to other analytical systems out there. I mentioned FPI and SP Plus, both from ESPN, have Georgia number one. Why do we have Georgia number two? And the way we calculate it, it's roster strength. That's what it comes down to. We, as I mentioned, get this roster strength number by adjusting that recruiting talent for experience and production. And Ohio State just has more of both of those right now than Georgia does. If we look, position by position, and when I say raw talent, usually I'm referring to these recruiting ratings coming out of high school. The first one I look at is 247 Sports. Just have used it from the very beginning of our CFP Winning Edge days. And though we do track Rivals and On3, both of whom I respect, have had people ask for both of those to be a part of our team profiles because they're fans of all three sites. But 247 is just one that I'm very comfortable with. So if you look average 247 composite rating, position by position for Georgia, top 5 QB unit, top 10 at the running back position. At wide receiver, just top 20, but that includes some of those incoming transfers who maybe were a little under the radar. Colby Young, one of those, was really low rated JUCO recruit, ended up at Miami, flashed, and now looks like potentially a star, certainly red zone target, expected to be a big play receiver for this Georgia offense. The tight end position, nobody recruits it better than Georgia. Same for the offensive line. At the defensive line, number 3 in average 247 rating. The linebackers, number 1. So that's part of the reason why Dumas Johnson and Marvin Jones are still potentially impact losses, but not irreplaceable if you just look at the talent on hand. And the secondary, number 2. So elite talent at just about every position, even the one where they're outside the top 10 or right there in the top 20 at wide receiver. Georgia was aggressive in adding players to the mix, including Young, Humphreys, and Michael Jackson III, formerly of USC, but also, have some experience coming back and Lovett. And then Thomas and Bell were actually starters, quote unquote, being on the field for that first snap in more than half of the team's games. Lovett was not, but did end up playing a higher percentage of snaps, 53.3%, according to our calculations using those PFF snap counts. So Georgia is in a very, very good position. And even though they are a little behind Ohio State in roster strength, 4th overall in our current numbers, number 5 on offense, number 8 on defense, there is room for improvement. So Georgia, they come out in week 1 against Clemson, get off to a strong start there, have an opportunity to pad the stats a little bit against Tennessee Tech, and then that SEC opener at Kentucky, which is going to be a tough matchup. But they get off to a good start. They start rolling. Etienne, puts up a couple of 100-yard games, and Young and Lovett put up good numbers. These individual player ratings will grow. They will improve. Perhaps we are underrating Colby Young specifically a little bit. He's roughly FBS average right now in that VGR, our video game ratings. Think of it like that. college football 25 EA Sports, overall player rating, that's sort of the equivalent here. Even though we don't cap it at 99 like EA Sports does, you can think of them in a very similar way. So Young, perhaps a little bit underrated for us. Same maybe with other receivers in that room, but it's still an area where Georgia's going to have an opportunity to improve, and don't be surprised if by the end of the year they're maybe top 2 in roster strength instead of number 4 overall. Defensively, in a similar position, there's more as far as returning starter numbers coming back, especially in that linebacker core where 3 of the 4 starters are back. Nazir Stackhouse, very experienced in that front 3, 2 starters back in the secondary, but still some room for improvement when you look individual. We get a defensive line that, as far as those top 3 starters, we're used to seeing number 1 draft picks, either that interior defensive line or coming off the edge at what Georgia uses outside linebacker positions. There's just maybe a little less of an established core, perhaps, on that defensive line this year. Guys like Terry Ingram Dawkins and Warren Brinson, Christian Miller, who was briefly in the transfer portal, the elite talent, when you look at a Jordan Hall or Jamal Jarrett, they're in good shape. They're in good shape, and they're going to add production to the mix and increase their player ratings and then those roster strength ratings. But as of right now, Ohio State's just a little bit ahead. All right. Getting into the schedule analysis and the win total projections, we talked about it on our Ohio State show, but traditionally, we have a good track record at CFB Winning Edge of projecting preseason win totals. However, it's been our, situation, whatever the best word is, where, we have an all-time record of doing every FBS regular season win total since 2021. So 3 full seasons. We have a 60.4% winning percentage all time. Last year we were 55.6%. But that also includes maybe an area where I feel like we've got some ability to improve on the extreme. So if a team is among the very worst in college football and has, a 1.5, 1.5 or 2.5 win total posted by somewhere like DraftKings, that's been what we've compared to officially for those 3 years, just sort of have it now, not that they're a sponsor or anything. We're always over. On the other end of things, if a team is in 11.5 in that win total, or even 10.5 like Georgia is this season, we're pretty much always going to be under the way that we calculate things. You can see here in our team profiles, we do projected point spreads for each game. We add up those projected point spreads. So you can see that right now we have Georgia as about an 8.5 point favorite against Clemson. That's a good bit less than the most recent, what I saw. I think Georgia's like a 13 point favorite in this game, according to some early numbers that I've seen. So we, a little bit lower perhaps there, but that equates to a 69% projected winning percentage for Georgia. So we get the 0.69 wins. Add all those up with the 100% against Tennessee Tech, the 68% against Kentucky, 59% against Alabama. And that gets us a 9.24, which seems quite low. 9-3 for Georgia that would be a major, major disappointment and pretty unexpected. They would basically have to lose, not necessarily every losable game, because I think you could theorize that, in the right scenarios, Clemson could beat Georgia, Alabama could beat Georgia, perhaps Texas. We have Georgia as a slight underdog in that game. I think Texas could beat Georgia, Ole Miss maybe. So maybe there are 4, kind of trouble spots, but basically everything would have to go wrong and Georgia lose 3 of those 4. And to go under or to hit our projected win total. So with that in mind, I want to give a little bit of an alternative calculation for our win totals on the extreme, Georgia being in the mix. So what we've done is add a 10% bonus for every game in which a team is favored. So we see Georgia's favored in 11 of 12 regular season games. So that's 11 for and 1 against. So we adjust those, add 10% of a win for each game in which they're favored and take one away when they're not. And we end up boosting that up to, 10.24. That seems about right. We're still projecting under, and I don't have a ton of confidence in that necessarily, but that gets us closer to what the odds makers have. And I think probably a little closer to correct, even though we're going to still be under there. So nevertheless, Georgia is a favorite, like we said, in 11 regular season games, favored by more than a touchdown in all but 3. The game against Alabama in Tuscaloosa, we have Georgia is about a 4-point favorite. That is a little bit of a trouble spot. They do get the week off leading into that, which is good. A little extra time to prepare. But double-digit, 2-touchdown type favorite against Auburn should have a fairly easy time with Mississippi State, which is a team in transition and on the lower end of our SEC power rankings. But that trip to Texas is going to be tough. So at Alabama and at Texas in the span of a month is in that 4-week span going to be difficult. But a little bit of extra time as usual to prepare for the Florida game. And then Ole Miss, once again, in the back half of the season in November. Last year, no problems, 52-17 final score. But this year, as we'll talk about Ole Miss pretty soon, next week actually, as they are a top 5 team in our current power ratings. But that game is in Oxford, so yet another, three of the toughest games. Arguably, you could say the 4 toughest games in SEC play: at Kentucky, at Alabama, at Texas, and at Ole Miss. So maybe that schedule setup just sort of hits a little bit, ups that level of difficulty to where maybe going under 10.5 is not a crazy thing to expect. We're not used to, obviously, Georgia losing in the regular season at all. Certainly not used to double or 2 losses in the regular season. But the actual setup of the schedule isn't the most advantageous. We talked about Ohio State, on Monday, and Ohio State had just 4 true road games. Well, Georgia's in the same spot, only 4 true road games, but the difference is Ohio State has 8 true home games, and Georgia has the 4 true road games and then 2 neutral site games against difficult opponents. Clemson, definitely among the ACC favorites, a playoff contender, a team that recruits quite well and has the potential to, I certainly understand them being more than a touchdown underdog in our projections and closer to 2 touchdowns in the eyes of the odds makers in the market. But that's still technically a losable game against a very tough and talented opponent. And then Florida's somewhat similar. I mean, expectations for Florida are very, very low because the Gators have the toughest schedule in college football, according to just about everybody. But there's still a lot of talent available for the Gators, and that's always a hotly contested game, and it's yet another tough opponent, and the way it sets up on the calendar, being a week ahead of Ole Miss. If Ole Miss is undefeated and in the mix for a playoff spot or SEC championship game, not that you're going to overlook Florida and look ahead to Ole Miss, but that sometimes can happen, has tripped up some teams in the past when there's a major matchup on the horizon. So like I said, my level of confidence is not particularly high that we've got Georgia pegged correctly here as a team that's going to be more in the 10-2, 9-3 range. I think absolutely this is one of the top 2 teams in college football. I think that our way of calculating things like roster strength in some ways, I think we do a really, really good job on the big middle in college football, maybe outside of the top 5 and outside of the, bottom 10. I feel really, really good about our projections in the middle. Sometimes we're just a little too low on the best of the best teams. Sometimes we're a little too high on the worst of the worst teams. And so keep that in mind as we go through our Georgia, projections here. So that is basically going to do it for us today. Again, as we've transitioned from more of a news-based show into more of these full team previews. It's possible the episodes will end up being a little bit shorter, less than that full hour. But when news does happen, we, of course, will add that at the beginning of the show as well. And then, as always, I want to tell you about the things that are going on at campus2canton.com, including that new draft tool, which please do, check it out. All of our current members, it is available for the rest of this week. If you've signed up, for as little as $2.99 per month, you get access to that draft tool. Try it out. For the longer term, it's going to be available to our NIL and All 22 tier members. And if you're an All 22 tier member, you get access to these team profiles as well. So thank you so much for joining us today. Please do give this video a like on the Campus to Canton YouTube channel. Please do subscribe to that channel. It really helps us out. And if you've got questions, if you want to, as we're doing these team previews, have a little extra time. If there's something that you'd like me to add to the mix, reach out. So, I want to make sure that these are useful to our members. Do want to, not necessarily just regurgitate what else is out there. There are plenty of other great folks who are previewing teams and conferences and all that stuff right now. But I want to really focus on what we have to offer at CFP Winning Edge, Campus to Canton. So if you've got questions, something else that we can shed some light on, reach out and let me know. Want to make sure these are as useful as possible. So that's going to do it for us today. Number 2, Georgia, definitely one of the teams to beat. Definitely expect that they will contend for an SEC championship, make it to the playoff. But if we're looking at the absolute floor, maybe our projections are where there are some trouble spots, there are some tough games, and there are some areas on this roster, on this, these 2 deeps, where perhaps there's a little bit of room for improvement. So that's going to do it for us today. We will be back on Friday with our Oregon preview, our number 3 team in our CFP Winning Edge team strength power rankings. Until then, have a great rest of the week and take care.